Good morning, everybody. We're just waiting for people to join. Welcome to the Tender Ready training with Go for Growth, with and on behalf of Bradford Council about the daytime activities for adults with a learning disability. It's reference number Delta November 77556. That's what you're here to chat with us about and hear about. So hopefully you're all in the right place. We'll just give it a couple of minutes to let people join, and then we'll crack on. Lauren, can you see if people are joining okay?
Yeah, we've got a fair few joined already.
Brilliant. Okay, let us crack on. I know time is precious, so we will get started this morning. So just to introduce ourselves, my name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of the directors of Go for Growth. Again, good morning and welcome to the session on Tender Ready training. I'm one of the co-founders of Go for Growth. I'm your host for today's webinar, but as you can tell, I am also joined by my colleague, Lauren Siddons, also, who is the procurement assistant at Go for Growth. Hi, Lauren.
Hello.
Before we get started today, I will just cover some quick housekeeping stuff. So firstly, the session is being recorded. A copy of the recording will be available via the Go for Growth YouTube channel after the event, and will also be emailed to you along with a copy of any of the slides. So we'll be referencing links to other video tutorials and potentially other websites today in the presentation. So any of the links that we reference in the slide deck will also be live links included in the pack that comes out to you after the event. So please don't worry about taking any notes or trying to remember URLs or anything like that. As always, we are on Zoom today and there is a chat and a Q&A function. Please do feel free to use both. We have got a good amount of time hopefully set aside at the end for questions and answers, but do feel free to ask questions as we go. And we'll either try and answer them as they come up, if that's relevant to do so, or we'll park them and answer them all at the end. Also, if there's a few of you around and you do want to say hi and introduce yourself, please feel free to do so in the chat function. You can just make sure that the chat function is set to who you want to see it, and that is usually a choice of either host and panelist or everybody. But if you do have specific questions, if we could ask you to use the Q&A functionality, that would be super helpful. My colleague Lauren will keep an eye on both chat and Q&A, and she'll stick a hand up if there is anything for us to cover as we go. So please do feel free to use either. What we're going to try and cover today effectively is three things, I think. We're going to cover the tender process more generally. So this will be helpful, not just for this opportunity in Bradford, but for any opportunity that you might be going for in the future. We are going to drill down into some specifics for this particular daytime activities procurement for Bradford City Council. And then we're just going to talk really briefly about some of the help that's on offer to help you through this and any other process in the future. So we're starting with the steps in an open tender process, and that's what your the Bradford City Council or City of Bradford Council have issued. It's an open tender process, so anybody can submit a tender response to that. And so these are the basic steps that will be in any public procurement process. So first, what you have is an advertisement of an opportunity, both current and future, and you would find them on procurement portals like EU Supply, but also Contracts Finder and Finder Tender Service, which are search engines that are hosted by the Cabinet Office, the central government. And those search engines have opportunities for any public sector organisation. And if you're using the Finder Tender Service, that has replaced the official journal of the European Union. So Finder Tender Service is where opportunities have to be published above threshold, and you would find anything on Finder Tender Service above 118,000, excluding VAT, total contract value. On Contracts Finder, you should be able to find anything over 25,000 in value for wider public sector or over 10,000 for central government departments. And those values are important because they're usually a maximum in terms of the total contract value. And it's worth noting that those numbers are not necessarily a guarantee of what you can achieve through a contract. Some bids will specify maximum costs, for example, and if you submit anything above those maximum costs in a bid, you could end up being disqualified, and that usually applies or sometimes can apply where there's day rates at play, for example. You will be submitting your bid, but before you submit, you would have the ability to ask any clarification questions. So every process will have a clarification period where you can ask questions to the contracting authority through the portal to clarify information that would help you to bid. Our advice would be to use that clarification process as early as possible. We do get examples of providers that don't read documents till quite late in the process and sometimes actually can miss that clarification question deadline. Authorities might try and answer those questions if they can, or they will try and answer them, but actually they don't have to answer them once that clarification deadline has passed. So you would ask all your questions, write your tender response, you would submit it, then it would go in for scoring, so that evaluation period would take place. And usually there's a moderation, so you would have independent evaluation taking place. Those scores would be ratified through a moderation process to make sure that they are appropriate. And then there would be an intent to award. And that's when the winners and losers are notified of who the intended contract winner is. And usually then a standstill period of 10 calendar days clear would take place. So the public sector can't award a contract on a weekend or a bank holiday. So once winners and losers are notified, you get your feedback, you then have 10 clear days to decide whether that feedback is sufficient or whether you think the process has been run correctly, or indeed if you do wish to challenge it. And it's worth noting that that standstill period has to be observed if they're over threshold. And when I talk about over threshold, I'm actually going to include VAT in this now. So over threshold would be anything, and it's total contract value, the sum of all of the lots over the whole of the contract period. So for supplies and service, which this contract for Bradford would apply to, the whole contract value over 213,477. So this is clearly over threshold. For works, which is generally construction type stuff, it would be 5.336937 million. And then there is the light touch regime, which would be at play, which the threshold is £663,540. So, Lauren, do jump in if there are any questions that you feel I need to answer as we go, won't you? So I've put this in here. You might be here today because you've already seen the Bradford opportunity on the Your Tender portal, which is hosted by EU Supply. You might be super familiar with Contracts Finder, so I'm not really going to dwell on this slide today, but just in case, what we've done is we've embedded some tutorial videos into the images to help you navigate both of these portals. So Contracts Finder is that search engine that I talked about, where you should find opportunities over 25,000 for wider public sector or 10,000 for central government. And EU Supply is where you'll find and bid for Bradford Council opportunities. So those videos are there to help you should you need them outside of this webinar. And so I've broken the general public procurement process down into 6 elements that you can see on screen. And where those titles are underlined, that's a live link to a video tutorial that we've done. So as I said in the housekeeping at the front, any of those live links will be live in the slide deck, which will come out in PDF format after this event. So if you did want to go and watch a short 20-minute video tutorial on the standard selection questionnaire, for example, you can simply click through in that slide deck. But if we take it from the top, so the invitation to tender, in any procurement, there'll be bidder instructions. And you can usually find them in the invitation to tender pack somewhere. They could be a separate document, or they could be in the ITT, the invitation to tender itself, but there will always be bidder instructions. There could be a lot of them, so our advice is try not to be overwhelmed by these instructions, but obviously don't ignore them either. They are there to help you navigate the process itself. And so they should give you all of the information that you need in terms of how to actually get through that procurement process from end to end. And at the front end of any procurement process, there will be something called the Standard Selection Questionnaire, the SSQ. That's the abbreviation for it. And we love an abbreviation in the public sector. If we can have an acronym, we absolutely will. And there are 8 sections to the Standard Selection Questionnaire, but depending on how big or how complex the procurement is and in what sector, for example, social care, you might not have to answer all 8 sections, but you will have to answer some. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between selection criteria and evaluation criteria in a few slides' time. And in any procurement, there will also be a specification, and we're going to focus on specification a little bit today. So, but in brief, it's basically the description of what the contracting authority wants to buy. So they've written down what it is they want to buy and effectively how they want to buy it and what's important to them through this procurement process and the resulting service or product that they're, trying to purchase. There'll also be an evaluation criteria, and that effectively is how your bid responses will be scored, and that every contracting authority has to tell you in advance how they're going to score your responses, and they'll give a definition of the score. And again, we're going to go through the evaluation criteria for this particular procurement in a little bit more detail. But you will get a description of how the responses are scored and how much each question is worth, and there might be a weighting in that as well. And then you'll have quality and technical questions as well as pricing. We're going to go through a specific example from this tender of a quality question in more detail, so we'll come up to that later. And there will be legal terms and conditions at play, obviously, in any tender. There's a resulting contract of one of the documents in this particular procurement. In terms of the terms and conditions, our advice is read them really carefully. Ask any questions on the legal environment that you might have to the contracting authority through the clarification process. And if you're a member of your local chambers, or if you're a member of the Federation of Small Businesses, or any other membership organisation where legal advice comes as part of your membership package, ask those questions there if you want to as well. There is a lunch and learn on legal terms and conditions. It's not legal advice, but it is practitioner guidance, so you can have a look at that one as well. And then finally, this feedback. So all bidders will be notified whether they're successful or unsuccessful. And if it's the latter, what you should get is your score versus the winning score. And you should hopefully get some detailed feedback and an explanation of those scores. So, what your gaps were versus the winning bidder. You should get notified of who the winning bidder is. And there are new regulations coming into force for public procurement late 2024, winter 2024, and that does change how feedback is going to be given, and it does make it better for providers. And again, there's a live link in that feedback for you to go to a quick 15-20 minute video on what that feedback environment looks like. So all of those links are there for you to have a click through at a later date if that's helpful. We got any Q&A that we need to address, Lauren?
Yes, I'd just pop my hand up to raise that one. So we had a question from an anonymous attendee just regarding pretty much what you've just covered. So they'd said they'd used a bid writer recently for a tender but was unsuccessful. The bid writer has argued that the panel had not considered the responses fairly and said that they should have challenged the decision. The attendee is wanting to know what the likelihood of such challenges to be successful would be, and whether it would be worth straining the relationship.
I mean, it's such a subjective environment in a way, but the principles that underpin public procurement means that processes have to, by law, be run fairly and equitably. Those are the things that enshrine public procurement. So every contracting authority aims to run a fair and transparent and equitable process. And if you believe that hasn't happened, then you do have the ability to challenge. And it's really a very personal decision on whether you think it's going to strain the relationship or not. But it is your right to say, I don't think this has been done correctly, and I would like you to have a look at it. And it shouldn't actually strain the relationship for doing so. Contracting authorities should welcome that challenge in lots of ways if it's done rightly and it's appropriate and it's a fair challenge. There is something called the PPRS, the Public Procurement Redress Scheme. And actually, if you're outside of that 10-day period now, you can actually go to the PPRS and we'll pop a link in the slide deck and you can ask them to look at the process. Now, they're not a body that has any particular weight, but they can and they will investigate the process to see if it's been run fairly. And if they find that it hasn't been run fairly, then they can request that the contracting authority rerun that procurement. So I think if you genuinely believe that the process hasn't been run fairly, then you have the rights and the mechanisms to be able to take that to the contracting authority. Whether it would be successful or not is an unanswerable question, but you do have the right, and those mechanisms do exist for all of the right reasons for you to use them. We'll pop some information in the slide deck so you have that around PPRS, but it is there for you to use if you want to. Hopefully that answers the question a little bit.
And that covers all questions for now. Thank you.
No problem. So we're going to just delve into this particular procurement in a bit more detail. So if you've downloaded the document pack for daytime activities for adults with a learning disability already, you might note that there are 10 documents in the ITT pack. And I'm just going to go through those documents with you just now. So the first one is ITT Part 1. And that houses all the important information. So it will give you the key dates. So some of the key dates I can tell you is that the clarification question deadline is 5 p.m. on the 18th of October. There is then a response deadline to those clarification questions, which is also in those key dates. And the submission date in the table is 12 p.m. on the 1st of November 2023. So those are the timescales that you're looking for, but have a read through the ITT Part 1. It also includes the scoring criteria. It also includes the annual expected budget per lot and information on the lots that are there. And there are 26 different lots in this procurement, and you can apply for one or more lots. It's all detailed on page 4 of ITT Part 1. And you can apply up to a maximum of 4 contracts. So you can be awarded up to a maximum of 4 contracts. So all of your important information is in that ITT document Part 1. ITT document Part 2 is your tender response document. So that's where you enter your responses. So there are drop-down menus. It is a Word document. So you use drop-down menus on page 2 and 3. And then from page 4, it moves into those selection questions that we talked about in the standard selection questionnaire. At stage 2, which comes at page 14, that's where the technical and quality questions are housed. So you'll note actually in sections 1 and 2 of the quality questions, you'll only answer those questions 1 and you'll answer them all. Whereas section 3, you complete the questions that are relevant to your lots only. You'll also note that helpfully the questions point you to the relevant part of the specification, and we'll talk about the specification shortly. But it is really helpful actually because it shows you specifically where they're referring that question back to in the specification. Section 3 also contains pricing. And if you do have any questions on pricing, ask them as early as you can through the clarification process, and that functionality is on your tender. Appendix 1, document 3 is the service specification, super important document. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail shortly. Document 4, which is Appendix 2, is the project description. So that's each lot. So there's more detail on what each lot covers. And then document 5, which is Appendix 3, is the contract that ultimately you will be asked to sign if you're successful. So those are the legal terms and conditions that you need to make sure that you're comfortable with, or ask any questions around, or get some advice over. Document 6, Appendix 4, is the TUPE confidentiality agreement. And to receive a copy of the TUPE information, you would need to sign that TUPE confidentiality agreement. You would need, it's Appendix 4, return it via the messaging function via your tender. TUPE is a complex piece of legislation. I can't on this webinar today cover the TUPE legislation. It's the Transfer of Undertakings and Protection of Employment legislation. If you're unsure about anything to do with TUPE, ask questions to Bradford for sure through the clarification process, and or seek specialist advice on TUPE. Document 7, Appendix 5, is staff comparator data. It has a guidance tab at the beginning of that workbook, which should help you complete it. And it is a document that you would need to complete and return as part of the tender. Document 8, Appendix 6, is a workbook, and this is something that you would need to complete if you were successful in being awarded any contracts through this procurement. And that's the same with the quality assurance document, which is document 9, appendix 7. Those are things that you would need to complete as part of day-to-day running of the contract if you were successful. So they don't need completing as part of your submission for the bid. And then finally, I know we've got a question coming in, so we'll get to that in a second. Finally, you've got Appendix 8, which is document 10, feedback from people using the services. So this is intelligence and learning from existing service users about the service that they are receiving, and crucially where services need to adapt in the future as well. Lauren, do we have a question that we need to take?
We do, yes. So a question regarding the tender application for each lot. So whether you'd have to submit a tender application for each separate lot, or whether you can submit just one application covering multiple lots.
So in the questions, there are some sections. So section 2, you would answer all of them, but only once. And section 3, you would only complete for the lots that you apply for. So if you were applying for 4 separate lots in section 3, so say you're applying for ACE, you would complete the question for ACE, lot 1. And if you're also applying for lot 4, you would complete the question for lot 4 and whatever lot you're doing. So if you read the instructions, there's a set of questions that you answer regardless of how many lots, and everyone will answer them. And then there's some that are just specific to the lots that you are applying for. There's a bit of both, basically, is the answer.
Thank you.
We will come on to this later, but we're running 3 drop-in sessions during October, the 2nd, the 9th and the 16th, if memory serves me correctly. And they're there specifically for process questions. So when you get to read all the documents, if there's anything that you don't remember or doesn't make sense, you can come along to those drop-in sessions and we'll try and answer them. And if we don't know the answer, we'll submit it as a clarification question to the council as well. So you can always come along to those if you've got more questions outside of this webinar. But let's think about the specification in a bit more detail. As I mentioned before, it is basically what the contracting authority wants to buy, and it is a super crucial document in any bid. Our advice would be, and it's the way we approach it as an organisation, would be that one of the first jobs that you do when you're intending to submit a tender is to read through the specification thoroughly, make a note of any questions that you might have for the customer through that clarification process, noting any evidence that you might be able to use during the tender process, effectively ticking off the things that you can do that's in the specification, and potentially making a note of any gaps that you think you might have in being able to deliver against that specification. And if you do find you have gaps, it doesn't mean you can't go on to tender necessarily, but you can make a judgment call on whether you can deliver all of the specification, most of it or some of it, and whether you want to continue to create a response or not. But that specification effectively is what the contracting authority is asking you to deliver if you are successful. So it is super important. But it has a sort of dual role as well. So when you complete the quality questions, your answers to the questions should relate back to the specification. And effectively, that's what the quality questions are doing. They're testing your ability to deliver what's needed. So referencing back to the specification through the question should help to enhance your scores. And actually what Bradford have done with this super helpfully actually is they've referred the question back to the specific part of the specification and any appendices that are relevant. So they've made it actually as clear as possible for you to be able to make that reference back. It is worth noting that in the quality questions, in that evaluation criteria, you should only be tested on things that are in the specification. So you should be able to always relate that quality question back to somewhere in the specification. So it should be a direct correlation. And then in terms of evaluation criteria, there's 2 types of scoring criteria in a procurement. So there's selection, which we've talked about, the standard selection questionnaire, and then there's evaluation. And selection is generally a bit of a look backwards. It sort of tests the whole business in terms of what you've got in place. So it will be asking you about your insurances, your accreditations, your policies, etc., etc. Evaluation is more about the contract specifics of what you will deliver if you are successful, and that's why it's framed back to the specification. So the questions should really be a bit more forward looking in terms of how you will do something. Now, if you can answer those evaluation questions, linking back to the specification, as I've mentioned, and backed up by evidence, then that should really help to maximise scores. And we'll talk through a question in more detail in a second. In this tender specifically, if you look at ITT Part 1, pages 18 to 19, that's where Bradford detail what the scoring is. And they're using non-standard scoring. So normally scoring has 5 tiers, but in this case, it's 0 to 8. And what they've done is give really clear guidance on what each score is attributed to. So for example, to score an 8, which is it's exceptional, it's the maximum score that you can achieve. They define that scoring criteria as follows, and I'm reading this verbatim. Demonstrates an excellent understanding of the service as described in the service specification Appendix 1 and project descriptions Appendix 2, has a clear focus on people who use services, their families and carers, and demonstrates an excellent understanding of their needs and wishes, including a user-led approach, demonstrates a strong understanding of the community in which the service is based and how they will make connections to it, and shows a high level of creativity and innovation backed up by clear evidence of the organisation's experience to deliver on this. So there's some real verbs in there in terms of what they're looking for. And if I relate that to a score of 1, which is significant concerns, the definition of that would be demonstrates little or no understanding of the service as described in Service Specification Appendix 1 and Project Descriptions Appendix 2, has no focus on people who use services, their families and carers, and fails to demonstrate an understanding of their needs and wishes, demonstrates little or no understanding of the community in which the service is based, and provides no new ideas for the service or plans for the future. So you can really see what the council is looking for. They're looking for that deep understanding of the community, the service, the people who use those services, the specification, but they're also looking for forward thinking, innovation and creativity backed up by evidence of how you can deliver those things. In every single case with any bid, we would recommend that you read the scoring really carefully and answer with that scoring criteria in mind. When you read back over your submission, and even better, as well as you reading it, if you can ask somebody who hasn't written it in your organisation to read it, look for the evidence against that scoring criteria. So for a score of 8, look for how you've evidenced a clear focus on people who use services, their families and carers, etc. If you can't find that in your answer, then you probably need to do more to demonstrate that if you want the highest score that you can get. And I'm going to talk about this on the next slide, but when answering the quality questions, the approach that we take is to break each question down into the verb elements, the doing bits. And we'll talk through that in a second, but there's some bits there just as sort of top tips, if you like. Only answer the question that's asked. And that feels very obvious, but it often isn't. And we've even fallen foul of this. You don't feel you have to repeat any of the question in your answer. You're just using word count and it's not going to give you any particular points. Make sure you evidence your answers as much as possible. And if additional documents are allowed and you want to use them, don't forget to provide any documents that you specify as part of your submission. And this tender uses a word count, and I'll show you it in a second. But Bradford Council and any contracting authority will be super strict with these constraints. So if you've got 1,000 words that you can use, only use 1,000 words or under. If you go over that 1,000 words, they simply will be redacted. They just won't be seen by the evaluator. They'll be cut off. So that's why we say don't repeat the question, because you're using that valuable word count. Don't waffle. Use that word count really, really wisely, or as wisely as you can. And this is a specific question from this tender. So this is lot one of the quality questions. And so what we've highlighted in yellow are the doing elements as we see them. And you might highlight them slightly differently, but effectively what we try and do is tick off each of those elements as we put them or include them in the answer, relating them back to the specification. So in this case, we've got is tell us why you are interested in taking on ACE and what are your plans to develop it, including your understanding of the needs of the people to be supported. That includes people with a learning disability and or autism. Think about your ideas for how you will transform these activities to ensure that you can offer people meaningful activities linked to the communities and linked to value for money. Include examples of innovation or of how you've transformed services previously. And if you can, in your answer, tick off that you've included those things and it refers back to the specification, and you can see in there it says service specification 1.10 and appendices 2 and 7. If you can refer and bring that information in and evidence those things, then that will hopefully increase your chances of getting the highest score. The green...
Well, I'm not sure, your microphone seems to have gone a little quiet. Yeah, only slightly. I think so.
Okay. If it goes again, let me know.
That's perfect. That's sorted it, but I will let you know.
Okay, do let me know if it goes again. Thanks, Lauren. Do I need to repeat anything, or do you think it was captured okay?
Fine, it was just a little quiet.
Okay, no problem. So on the screen in green, what we're showing is the constraint. So in this case, as we said, it's a word count. What we would advise is obviously that you double check that you're compliant to the word count. So don't go over 1,000 words basically, but do use as much as you can of that word count without waffling. If you're ticking off all of the bits of the question that are the doing elements that need evidencing, you will probably use most of that word count. And Bradford specifically, it's clear in how they've written the scoring criteria. The way we're interpreting it is that they're really looking for evidence of passion, for creativity, and that real deep understanding of client groups. And so if you can get that over in your answers, that could be really helpful. And just one other thing, I guess, to remember with this stuff is that anything that you write down in any bid, and this is no different, if you're successful, your answers to those questions will become contractualized. So basically, you'll be legally obliged to deliver what you said. So, and that's why evidencing it can be really important and helpful for better scoring, because not only are you saying, I will do this, I can do this, you're showing how you would do that. And if you're using evidence of how you have done it before or infrastructure that you've put in place, then that can often be really helpful. Anything before we move on, Lauren?
Yeah, just one question has just come in. So can the organisation provide examples of previous experiences managing projects and supporting people with learning disabilities and autism? If current services have fewer examples, can knowledge of the registered manager be demonstrated as experience?
I mean, you know, your experience comes in different forms, and one of the as I was talking about the principles that enshrine public procurement of fairness, equity and transparency, everybody should have the same opportunity to answer these. And so actually what they're looking for is confidence in your ability to deliver against a specification. And if your experience and evidence of doing that has come from a slightly different context, then that should absolutely be fine. You know, it is really about how you demonstrate that capability and ability to deliver the specification as they've designed it. So if you've got experience of working with communities from different contexts or in different ways, it's still experience of working with those communities. What they're looking for in the questions is where you need to really focus. So your ideas for how you'll transform these activities, how can you show and evidence and back up those things that you think you would do to transform these activities? And your experience might come from a multitude of places for those things. So it's about linking all of those things together, but no one type of experience should count you in or count you out. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
So there is a question on social value in this tender, and so we wanted to just make sure that we covered social value quite briefly. So what is it? The Public Services Act was assented in 2012, so it's the Public Services Act 2012. It was called the Social Value Act. And there are some national priorities for social impact that are set out in something called the National Procurement Policy Statement, the NPPS. And that effectively describes the behaviours and the ambitions and aspirations of public procurement. And it has some themes in there around creating new business, creating new jobs, skills, tackling climate change, tackling waste, increasing supply diversity, innovation and resilience, and those things. And it kind of reinforces the message that procurement's not about the lowest price, but it is about the need to take a broad view of that value for money piece, including social impact. Oh, excuse me. And I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. So the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted by all the United Nations member states, obviously including the United Kingdom, in 2015. And that provides a shared blueprint, if you like, for peace and prosperity for both people and planet, now and into the future. And at the heart of that blueprint are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And they're an urgent call for action by all countries, both developed and developing, in the format of a global partnership. And what the SDGs try to do is recognise that ending poverty and other deprivations has to go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, that reduce inequality and that spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve both our oceans and our forests. And what you'll see in the Bradford tender is that Bradford are focusing on their anti-poverty strategy. So it's question 6 in the ITT tender response. And they provide 4 goals and are asking you as bidders to choose 2 of those goals that you can align to through this contract. And you've got 250 words per answer to detail how you'll deliver and measure your contribution to those 2 aims of the 4 that you choose. And that's looking at both through the people that you would support if you were successful in winning the contract or contracts, and also through the people that you employ in your organisation. So that's what they're trying to do. And poverty is no poverty is the first Sustainable Development Goal in the SDGs. And that's where Bradford are aligning to in social value for this procurement. And nobody will say that bidding is necessarily easy, although Bradford have tried really hard, and it's very clear that there's a lot of thought and effort has gone into making this a very clear and easy to follow procurement. But there are some common pitfalls that we all fall foul of that's potentially worth going through today. And about a year ago, we asked 10 public sector organisations what they thought were the top things that providers can fall foul of. We've talked about not answering the question already. It does sound really obvious, but often it isn't. Often we want to tell the story that we want to tell, and what we really need to do is answer the question that they've asked in conjunction with a specification, answering what they actually ask us rather than what we think they want to ask us or what we would really like to tell them. And not doing that can often result in lower scores. Not submitting the documentation requested. If you've been asked for a specific document, make sure that you include it. So you might be asked for a risk register. In this case, it's staff comparator data. Make sure you do submit that documentation. Or if you are saying you're going to submit something that helps you to evidence your submission and then you don't include it, that can be really difficult and will affect, obviously, or it potentially will affect scoring. Caveating is just a bit of a no-no, really. Bids received with caveats in about what you can do. If the price is X, I'll be able to do Y. If the price is Z, I'll be able to do A. Those things are just super hard for any contracting authority to score. So if you've got a bit of a situation where you think, well, if it's that, if you mean that, I can do this, ask the question first. Try not to caveat, and especially try not to caveat what you'll deliver versus the price that somebody would pay, unless this specifically has been asked that way. We've talked about the specification, so I won't go over it again, but you do need to make sure that you relate back to the specification, and Bradford have made that really simple by pointing you to the relevant parts. Reusing previous bids. I mean, I'm a fully paid up member of not having to do everything from scratch every time. However, it comes with some health warnings. If you are using information that you've used before in other bids, make sure that you assess the relevance for this, remove any references that are inappropriate or references other clients or other areas, etc. Just obviously do due diligence on the information, make sure the context is right, etc. That lack of evidence that we talked about, again, super important. When you're writing something, say, we're really great at this. Imagine the evaluator going, how do I know that? How do you show me that you're really great at this? We've got really strong relationships with such a person over there. How do you evidence that strength of that relationship? How do you measure it? How do you keep that relationship going, etc., etc.? So think about all the time the so what of what you're writing down. How am I backing that up? Key information missing is, and there's two sides to that, including information that's superfluous to requirements versus key information that's been asked for isn't in there. That's why it can be helpful, and obviously you'll work in a way that makes the most sense to you, but it can be helpful to tick those verb elements off from each quality question so you know that you have included information about each one. Word or page counts, in this case it's a word count. Make sure you use as much of it as you need to and can do, but obviously don't go over it. And assumptions, you know, they will hurt if you make them. Even if you're an incumbent provider and you have a great relationship with the council, none of that information can be used by an evaluator. Don't assume that they will fill in any gaps or that they'll go and Google something. If you use an acronym, don't assume that they know what it means. Spell it out at least once and then put the acronym in brackets, and then you can use it later on. But you will only be judged on what you write down in that tender submission and nothing else. And you'll be judged against your answer will be judged against the question. So you must write it down. At the end of it, you don't want to say, well, they know I do that. And they might day to day know you do that, but unless you write it down in your bid, you won't be scored against it. So don't make any assumptions that any prior knowledge can be taken into account, because it absolutely can't. It's not allowed. And then finally, selection questionnaire compliance. Make sure that you've got the accreditations, the licenses, the policies, the procedures, the insurances that are required to pass that selection questionnaire part of it. And we do have a public sector supply ready accreditation through Go for Growth, which is free to do, and it tests that selection questionnaire. It makes sure that you do have everything that you need before you go into any procurement. And then some key messages for this procurement specifically. So, and actually, some of these apply to any procurement that you do. In any procurement, read all of the documents carefully. Make a note of key dates, for example, but read all the documents carefully. Read them as early as you possibly can. And that moves on to question 2. Any questions that you have, our advice is always ask as early as possible through the clarification process. Don't wait until the 11th hour when clarifications are due to close, and then you've got less time after you've got a response from that clarification to complete your bid. In this case, TUPE may apply. It is a complex piece of legislation, so do make sure that you understand the implications of TUPE and seek advice if you need it. And what's clear in our view is that the council are looking for transformational service delivery through this procurement. So there's a double check for any bidder about, are you getting this across in your answers? And specification 1.10 really refers to that transformational delivery. And this is a competitive tender. And what that means is there's only one opportunity to take part. This is your opportunity to bid. This procurement won't reopen. There won't be other rounds of applications. So if you do want to secure work up to the 4 contracts, for example, this is your opportunity to do so. So please don't miss it if it is something that you want to do. And then also, have you uploaded everything that's needed for submission? So we know you'll need to submit your ITT response document, and we know that you need the staff comparator data. Is there anything else that you need to upload? that will go with your submission, either that the council have asked for or that you want to add in if you can do that. And then finally, what we tell ourselves and everybody else, check, double check and triple check everything before submission. It is amazing how many little bits of things, including spelling errors, or I've highlighted something to add it later and have I added it, just check, double check and triple check before submission to make sure that you're happy with everything that you're submitting. And of course, you're not in this alone. Whilst you are the bidder and Bradford Council now are separate from you to an extent in this process, they are there to ask questions of. You can use that clarification process. They will answer those questions as dynamically as they can, so do ask them. But there's also Go for Growth for process support. And as I mentioned earlier, 2nd, 9th and 16th of October, we've got 3 drop-in sessions for half an hour. It's an open floor. You can ask any question about process at all. We can't take pricing related questions, and we can't take technical questions around your service or the service that the council is looking for. Those are clarification questions, but we will take questions on anything to do with process. And if there is something that you ask us that we can't answer, what we will do in those sessions is push it through clarification. In fact, all the questions we get will go through clarification, so everybody gets the opportunity to see those questions and answers. So they will be live links straight out to register for those. If you want to come along and you can decide on the day, please do feel free. Lauren and I will both be there, or at least one of us will be. But there's also lots of hopefully helpful video tutorials that we've got in our video library, so you can click through and have a look there. And Laura and I we're real people. We're here to help. Go for Growth is commissioned by Bradford, so all the support we give is free of charge for you to utilise. Our emails and phone numbers are on the screen. Please do feel free to use them. We are happy to help as much as we possibly can. And if you wanted a Teams chat, you want to share screens, you're unsure about something in the process, we've got a bookable calendar, so you can use that link to find a slot with either myself or Lauren that's convenient for you, and we'll do that over Teams. And you can use that one-to-one functionality and getting in touch with us as many times and as often as you would like. So please feel free to use that as much as you want to. And then finally, before we go for any further questions, if you do want to stay in touch with us, we do work for Bradford. We work for lots of public sector organisations. If you want to stay up to date, you can join our mailing list using the link, or you can use your smartphone to scan the QR code. The things that we'll talk to you about is other events that we've got going on, opportunities within the public sector, training that we're doing, courses that we're launching, that kind of thing. The commitment we make is we don't spam. We don't like it when we get it. We try not to send it out. So we promise we won't spam. And of course, as is right and proper, you can opt out at any time. So please do feel free to come and join our mailing list, and hopefully that information would be useful. And that's it from me. I know we've covered a lot today, and we've done a few questions as we've gone, which I hope the answers were helpful. If there are any further questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat. If when we finish the session, you go away and think, oh, I knew there was something I wanted to ask, I've now remembered, those contact details are there for you to use. So please don't be shy of sending questions. So if you'd rather ask them one-to-one, you can feel free to do that. But we'll just see if there's any questions left to answer. I think we've covered everything so far.
Yeah, there's no new ones gone in as of yet.
Okay, all right. Well, we're at 10 to 11. I know time is a very precious commodity for all of us, so I won't make us sit here staring at each other for 10 minutes while we wait and see if there's any questions. If there aren't any questions further, all that remains for me to say is thank you for joining us today. I know we're all super busy, so appreciate you taking time out. We hope that what we've talked through is useful and helpful. We'll try and get the slides and a copy of the recording out today or Monday at the latest. If you've got anything else you need help with, please just do give us a shout. We are here to help. Thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend. Oh, is there anything on Q&A? I just saw something pop up.
Just a thank you.
Brilliant. You're very welcome. And we'll see, hopefully, some of you or not at the drop-in sessions. Do feel free to come in.
Thank you.